I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Kia Seltos, a small SUV that's really caused quite a stir here in Australia because it fits the brief for what a lot of people are looking for in an urban crossover. Even though it's classified as a small SUV, it's certainly at the top end of the small SUV class in terms of size, and we'll have a look at that when we jump inside and see just how spacious the interior is. But I also think the Seltos, it looks pretty cool. It's certainly quite distinctive in appearance compared to something like a Mazda CX-30, which is what I see as this car's most natural rival. It has quite a blocky shape. It's available in a few bright colors as well as the usual grayscale rainbow. And also with a range of engines. So there's a fair bit of customization you can do with the Seltos. But the car that I have here is the second from the top Sport Plus with the 1.6 litre turbocharged petrol engine. And it's actually quite an interesting option because after this car, it's another $5,500 jump up to the top spec GT line. So today we're going to figure out, is this all the Seltos you need, or is it worth upgrading that one step further? Now, you can get into one of these cars from the mid 20,000s price point drive away, which is quite attractive, especially when you consider that the Seltos has a very presentable look both outside and in. I think the interior is quite handsome. It's built around this broad dashboard here with a really large, wide touchscreen that also has good resolution, so it can make use of that size. For example, when you press the home button on screen, it can present you three little widgets, your map, your media, and your trip computer all in the one space. And then if you need to see exactly what's happening around you, the map is really big. So that gets a big thumbs up from me. Then in front of you, you have traditional analog dials with a small trip computer readout in between, but it does give you what you need to know, including a digital speedometer. The steering wheel itself, I think, is actually really quite attractive. Got a nice leather wrap here, though that isn't standard on the base model. It's worth it to jump up to a model with the leather wheel because you're going to be touching it all the time. Same with the shifter. They feel good in the hand. Now, even though this particular Seltos is over $37,000 drive away, we are still sitting on cloth. You know that I don't mind that. I like a good cloth seat, and they do feel nice and supple and supportive, and the cloth isn't too low rent, but we do only have manually adjustable seats, and I kind of think value-wise, at this sort of price point, you would start to expect some electric adjustment, at least for the driver. Ditto seat heating, we don't have that. That is reserved for the top spec version. What we do have though is wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We've got a spot for a phone down here, no wireless charging, but we do have a fast charger USB port, in fact 2 of those. And then between the seats, we have a nice sized bin, leather lined, not adjustable though, but I think the driving position is pretty good. 2 cup holders, and the door bins are fairly generous as well. But one thing quickly worth noting is that the Seltos has a 6-speaker stereo until the top grade, which just sounds a bit average. So if you're an audiophile, you will benefit from the GT line's 8-speaker Bose premium stereo. But up front, on the whole, I think it's very nice actually. Jumping into the back is where the Seltos gets to reap the benefits of being a big, small SUV. First things first, the door opens really wide, which is going to make it easy to fit a child seat. Closes with a decent sort of quality thunk. And then you'll see that the room on offer for adults is actually really good. And that's because the Seltos isn't that much shorter than the Sportage in the Kia lineup. It's about 10 centimeters shorter. It's a little bit bigger than the Mazda CX-30, but on the whole, room is good. So for myself at 6 foot, I have lots of headroom. Note that this car doesn't have a sunroof. You do get one of those on the top spec GT line. Legroom, I've got another several inches, and toe room is no problem sitting behind myself. So adults or tall teenagers will be perfectly comfortable here in the back of the Seltos, or if you've got 2 baby seats, they'll fit without too much trouble. So you do actually get a good amount of room. In terms of other features though, it's a mixed bag. We do have an armrest here with 2 cup holders. We've got 1 seat back pocket, just the one, don't get one here on the back of the driver's seat. The materials are harsh on the top of the door, in fact, both in the front and in the back, but we do have a soft armrest. But probably the biggest omission for me is air vents. At $37,000 drive away, it's crazy that this car doesn't have rear air vents in a country that gets really hot like Australia. So mixed bag in the back altogether. But where the Seltos redeems several points is here around the back. Also quite attractively presented, I think, with this sort of silver piece of trim breaking up the Mars orange of our test vehicle. Manual tailgate, but it's pretty light and it doesn't actually go up that high, so I think most people will be fine with it. The amount of space on offer in the boot is good. This is another place where the larger size of the Seltos helps it out a bit. It's a really wide opening, good aperture, very, very flat, so you can just take your suitcases straight in and out, no problem. We do have a spare wheel under there, which is great. No discrete, netted off storage or anything like that, and no shopping bag hook. So it's kind of just a big space here in the back, but it does the job. And we do have a sturdy cargo cover here as well. And like I mentioned, it's actually one of the easier manual boots to close that I've experienced. But what is the Seltos like to drive, and which engine should you go for? That's the next thing we're going to be finding out. So what is the Kia Seltos like to drive, and where does it sort of fit in within the taxonomy of Hyundai and Kia SUVs? Plus, how does it compare to its main rivals that I basically see as vehicles like the Mazda CX-30 and the Skoda Karoq and perhaps the Toyota CHR as well, although that last car isn't quite as practical as the Kia. Well, I actually think that this small SUV is pretty good to drive, but it's quite specification dependent in that there's a big difference between the sort of base grade cars and the engine that they get and the optional 1.6 litre turbocharged engine that I'm driving here. And it isn't a case of having to buy the turbo engine, it's just that the Seltos is quite different if you go for that option. So what do I mean by that? Well, the base car is a kind of traditional example of a Kia in that it runs a 2 litre naturally aspirated petrol engine as the base solution. So it's a bigger displacement 4-cylinder, but with no turbocharging. And that car produces 110 kilowatts of power and 180 Newton meters of torque put through the front wheels with a CVT automatic gearbox. And so what that means is just basic transport, works fine, won't be especially economical or punchy, but if you just need a car, that'll get the job done. However, the optional engine is basically what I would think of as like the European spec Seltos. So what we have here is an engine that's kind of reminiscent of what you would get in a European vehicle of this size and price. So a 1.6 litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder producing 130 kilowatts of power, so just a little bump, and 265 Newton meters of torque, which is A, a big bump numerically, but B, it delivers its torque in a very different way, much further down in the rev range, as opposed to the 2 litre base engine, which you have to rev quite hard to get the best out of it. So with the turbo, the Seltos feels nice and effortless to drive. It's got plenty of torque available low down, so you just sort of use a little bit of throttle input and you just pull away nice and smoothly. Plus the turbo has, well, it has a real gearbox. I was going to say a proper gearbox, but I know that some of our viewers don't regard dual clutches that way. But what we have here is a 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, another Euro-esque aspect to the Seltos. Now, this dual clutch is not as good as a Volkswagen Group unit. VW have worked so hard and spent so much money refining their various dual clutch units to the point where they feel pretty smooth and normal most of the time. I would say that with the Kia Seltos, with its dual clutch, you do need to kind of learn how it likes to be driven more linearly, not stabby on the throttle, and every so often it will just feel like it hasn't selected the right gear, and also the transition into reverse feels a bit odd. But all of these things, they don't sound great, but you very quickly learn to adopt a driving style that the Seltos is happy with. It's not a huge deal. So that's the engine and gearbox. The ride and handling is also pretty good. I would say that Kias in general are a little firmer than their Hyundai counterparts, with which they share a lot of elements under the skin, and so it goes for the Seltos. The ride is firm, but mainly and mostly compliant around town. You certainly notice the bumps, but the damping is generally good, so a speed bump doesn't sort of jar the cabin, but just every so often you'll hit a lateral pothole or an expansion joint that will just feel a little bit rougher than I think it needs to. The ride quality isn't plush. It isn't plush, but it's generally compliant and comfortable enough. Where the Seltos shines in terms of ride is at higher speeds. On the highway, it feels very, very stable. Its high-speed cornering is really good. So if you do quite a lot of country touring, I think you'll like the stability and the general competence of the Seltos. Steering-wise, the steering's quite heavy. You can change the modes, but I just left it in its normal mode most of the time, and I would say the steering does have a bit of artificial weight to it, but if you're downsizing from a bigger car, I think you'll probably like that. The steering is totally fine. The front end goes where you want it to go, but without any sort of genuine feel or anything like that through the wheel, and grip levels are just okay on the Kumo tires. It's not inspiring to drive fast, but it's certainly competent and gets the job done. Refinement wise is where the Seltos could make a big improvement in a future update. A, there's quite a bit of road noise, and B, listen. This 1.6 litre turbo, while being a good engine, just doesn't sound great. It has this funny sort of fizzy noise to it, buzzy, fizzy noise that initially sounded way off to me. I mean, I've got a little bit used to it now over my week driving this car, but certainly I think that needed some additional tuning before being signed off on. But once again, it's something that you get used to, and you can always just pump up the tunes and drown it out anyway. Safety-wise, Seltos claws back quite a lot of points. This Sport Plus grade has the safety pack as standard. It's only an option on the base car. And with the safety pack, any of the cars that have the safety pack included have a 5-star ANCAP rating, because they get stuff like AEB that can detect pedestrians and cyclists. We've got adaptive cruise control, we've got lane keep assist, we've got blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, and a decent reversing camera as well. So all in all, it's pretty modern and pretty safe. So that's a detailed look at the 2020 Kia Seltos. I reckon there's a lot to like about this biggie small SUV. I think it's pretty good looking. I think that interior presents really nicely, and it's also good to drive, but it is worth splashing out on the 1.6 litre turbo engine that makes the Seltos feel more grown up than its 2 litre atmospheric entry point. So I would do that, and I would also closely consider the GT line. Even though it's pretty expensive, above 40 grand drive away, it does have that smattering of premium features that'll make you feel like you're buying into something a little bit special. I just negotiate hard with that price. Let me know all of your thoughts about the Seltos below this video, whether you think this is a good little SUV. Any other remarks or requests, while you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.